Welcome to Next in Tech, an S&P Global Market Intelligence podcast where the world of emerging tech lives. I'm your host, Eric Hanselman, Chief Analyst for Technology, Media, and Telecom at S&P Global Market Intelligence. And today, we're going to be discussing payments technology in automotive, a set of places where there are interesting developments that are taking place that are bringing these two technology areas together. To discuss that today are two of our analyst team, Beatriz Minamy and Sophia Furber. Welcome to the podcast to you both.
Thanks, Eric. Happy to be here.
Hello. Thanks for having me on the podcast, Eric.
It's great to have you here because we've talked about both of these areas independently, but especially when we look at the integration that's taking place, there's some fascinating trends that are at work that are bringing these two together and some interesting aspects of those intersections that I thought it would be interesting to get into. I guess to start, maybe give us a little background on really what the market trends are and what this transition looks like, really some of the forces that are at play.
Yes, absolutely. I'll take this first, Eric. The automotive industry is undergoing a big transformation with electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles, and what we call the software-defined vehicles. These are driving new technologies, including in-vehicle payments. What we observe is that this, for a specific case for in-vehicle payments, we have been studying it for a few years now. And one of the challenges that arise is finding the right use case for this technology to fly and to be adopted by clients. Indeed, electric vehicles offers an opportunity, as much of these electric and hybrid vehicle owners are connected and are paying for a subscription, which facilitates, of course, the adoption of in-vehicle payments. When it comes to the use cases, there are different applications, not only on connected services, but also on ADAS and automated driving features that could also be sold as an upgrade for the vehicle once it is sold. That could come with over-the-air updates and could be also be paid through this technology.
Really sounds like this is a transition that is mirroring a lot of what we've seen in other areas of tech, but in automotive, the idea of this level of software definition is something that is relatively new from an industry that is long and storied and fairly well established. It seems like we're starting to get into some relatively new areas and in an area in which there's really some feeling out of what the real practical use cases actually look like.
Yeah, absolutely. The software-defined trend is combining not only software, of course, but hardware elements. New in-vehicle architecture, electric and electronic architectures are enabling software-defined vehicles. With the arrival of software-defined vehicles, we will see more compute capabilities, more edge-to-cloud capabilities, opening up new opportunities and use cases for in-vehicle payments, and not only limited for automotive use cases, but integrating the full ecosystem, marketplace, insurance, and other use cases.
And it seems like it starts out with some of the basic pieces, all of the charging capabilities, some of those nuts and bolts pieces, but this really could expand to a lot of different aspects when you think about once you've got payment capabilities that are integrated.
Yes, absolutely. You mentioned a key point here. So the charging infrastructure represents, we'll say, the first real necessity use case for in-vehicle payments. And we have seen some solutions already in the market with the plug and charge and many other OEMs and charging infrastructure providers and technology providers working on these use cases to make it real. The plug and charge enables the driver to charge the car and avoid using any type of physical device or card to pay. So the information of the car goes in the charging station and the payment process is done in the cloud. And then the driver gets the receipt within an email. So this is quite relevant for fleet use cases, for instance. When we have discussed with different clients, they have highlighted the relevancy of EVs and the opportunity that this brings especially on the charging space to make it real, the vehicle payments. Other use cases, of course, in vehicle payments are applicable for fuel payment, of course, tolls, and also parking, food and beverage in a third or fourth position. So we have this information available in our vehicle survey, autonomous vehicles, in the first quarter of 2024. Fuel and charging was the first use case, 30% of, acceptance within our audience, within respondents.
Yeah, I mean, it seems like one of those things, and I'll reference our listeners to the Voice of the Connected User Landscape study on vehicles. It sounds like people are identifying the simple upfront things first, but there is that larger set of capabilities that potentially, because you've mentioned not only just the fueling pieces, parking, food and beverage, a lot of these things that seem to be sort of natural adjacencies that could grow out of an integrated payment capability. The trick is we've got to get towards the payment side of this to begin with. So that's where the payment side comes in.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll just hop in on this one from a FinTech standpoint. Beatriz, thanks for the scene setting there. I think there's so much that can be done in terms of automotive payments. And I think the idea of kind of having the car itself being the payment device is really interesting. I would say one theme that is pretty common across automotive payments, so we're thinking about sort of fuel and parking, is sort of poor user experience. Definitely the case in Europe that I suppose the payments experience that people might have when paying for parking or paying for fuel is not as seamless and as smooth as they would expect when they are, say, for example, ordering from Deliveroo or shopping online for clothes or other consumer goods. So there's a whole wide open space that is ripe for disruption for creating much, much better user experiences. So I think that's a really interesting piece. In-car payments is interesting because it's kind of fits in with a broader, more overarching theme that we're seeing in FinTech of embedded finance. So for those who aren't familiar with the term, that means embedding financial products and experiences into the consumer journeys of non-financial services companies. So a classic example might be, say, a ride-hailing service that provides its own bank account or debit card for its drivers, or it could be a furniture company offering point of sale finance, buy now, pay later at the checkout. So I suppose the automotive piece is really interesting because it's sort of bringing financial services into a place where you wouldn't normally expect to find them, which is right inside your car. So I think there's a very interesting convergence of two trends there, right? The embedded finance piece, which we're seeing more broadly on the FinTech side, and then the car sort of from a hardware perspective being something that's able
This is one of the things that Jordan McKee had been on a few episodes ago, talking about integration and the extent to which now you've got the owners of particular vertical stacks, whether or not it happens to be retail in various forms, wanting to be able to integrate payments, to be able to make the customer experience better. But Sophia, as you were saying, it sounds like there's still some customer experience improvements that are possible, and certainly a set of dynamics that are taking place within the payments industry and in FinTech more broadly that's really impacting this as well.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose there's there's a lot of different kinds of friction as well, which, I suppose one is just like poor app experiences when I'm paying for parking. But then there's other things. If you look at this from a European perspective, there are a lot of toll roads on the European continent. That's all good and well if you're paying with a debit card for, say crossing from France into Spain. But if you're crossing into multiple different jurisdictions and then there's a currency conversion, not everyone is obviously in the euro. There's going to be charges on your bank card for using your card in a different jurisdiction. Some countries, those can actually be really high. So, I suppose there's a question of, creating payment experiences where, you can be in your car crossing into different jurisdictions and, you're not going to get slammed with all those currency conversion charges each time you pass a toll road. It's stuff like that where there's a lot of room for innovation to take place, not just in terms of getting through the toll booth quicker, but also just not paying fortune for it in
predictability, which is one of those things. If we get back to the fundaments of customer experience, it's one of the things that Cheryl Kingstone talks about a lot, is making sure that you've got something that is smooth, seamless, and understandable. And when you've got the potential to have extra costs that are not always necessarily predictable or at least unexpected, that really takes a hit on customer experience and that whole process. It sounds like those are some of the things that in the integration of FinTech in the automotive sphere, you really have to be addressed to look for much broader acceptance and hopefully greater success.
Absolutely.
So if we think about some of that integration and really what those overall trends are in terms of the application, how do both of you see this shift in the automotive sphere? It seems like there are a lot of different pieces that are potentially available to integrate. Where do you see that going? And what are some of the use cases that sounds like make sense around that?
I think, and as mentioned previously, the EV opportunity seems the most relevant nowadays. Now, looking at the automotive industry shifting from combustion to electric, we have various use cases, including, of course, charging, but also as well smart parking, where you can not only park your car, but you can also charge at the same time. Then Sophia mentioned also some multimodal also capabilities, the ability of paying an end-to-end trip, let's say door to door with just one click. And also the insurance case, which is also gaining relevancy. Most of the OEMs are now creating their own insurance, let's say a company. As mentioned, the software-defined vehicle, which are also known as data center on wheels, have the capability of gathering vast amount of data, and when it's processed, get a relevant insight. So how is a real driving score performance? So this is used notably for the insurance. So all of these are relevant use cases. And what we observe from a trend is that there will be more edge capabilities within the vehicles. So the computer power is increasing. Therefore, most of these data decisions will happen on board, with opening up more opportunities, again, for different use cases for in-vehicle payments.
So it seems like one of those situations where once you've got capacity within the vehicle, now you've got the ability to take advantage of it. And whether or not that happens to be telematics and being able to do integration for services that are based on it, as you mentioned, like insurance, things like that, that there's the possibility to potentially do more as the platform expands, as there's more capacity. I guess it's that classic technology situation of the applications are going to expand to consume all of the capacity within the platform they're operating. So
Absolutely, yes. It's kind of a nascent emerging trend, but many experts think that once it will proliferate, it will serve many use cases. So automakers and overall the overall industry ecosystem should be prepared, should anticipate the needs, not only from, the software, the platform, also the hardware as well, and the partnerships, which are key here.
Well, that raises that point about what those partnerships look like, because it seems like there are some of the core automotive OEMs that are looking to own some of this. There also are partnerships. There are financial players that have actually bought into this environment. There are a lot of different aspects that are in play. What are some of the details there?
Well, I can jump in on some of the financial services stuff. So from a sort of the payment processing or payment services standpoint, you've got a couple of the really big giants in payments processing, like JP Morgan, getting into the space and having alliances with all kinds of different auto manufacturers. So that's very interesting. I think JP Morgan, for those who aren't so familiar with the payment processing space, JP Morgan is a real center of gravity across the globe in payment processing. And we've seen them as being quite a sort of a front mover and a mover and shaker when it comes to payments, whether that's, sort of just payment acceptance or whether it's, coming up with, I suppose, like supporting the payment experience of providing a sort of embedded finance proposition. So they've been supporting Volvo, I believe, with their entry into the Indian market. With the payments piece around how people kind of pay for their new car once they've booked it. So that's quite interesting. And we are seeing fintechs as well, other fintechs kind of coming into the space. There's Stripe, there's Cirent, Blue Snap, on the banking side, Credit Agricole, Autobank. So we're definitely seeing more players moving into the space, but there's room for more. I think that's one thing I would underline. There's other areas of payments which are quite crowded, say e-commerce, for example, but auto, I think there is a lot of wide open space for fintechs who want to partner in an innovative way.
Well, it is something, though. I will call out, both of you mentioned that use cases are important and practical application is important. GM headed into a payments environment, and I think they were thinking about maybe the convenience store integration pieces, being able to expand it, but they've actually stepped back from it, yeah?
Yeah, it was in 2022, actually. They shut down this vehicle marketplace, which was powered by Zivo, and it was actually the first in-car commerce platform. The use cases were more on the retail side, like buying for coffee or pay for gas. So one of the hypotheses for this example, it didn't fly because it was not bringing enough differentiation and enough value to the customer to pay for this service. So if you find a use case that adds value within the customer journey, the client will pay for that. That's why, again, back to the EV use case, charging is a must use case. Clients are obliged to charge the car. Although it's important to mention that the EV market remains a niche, right? And still, it will take some years to have an EV park, let's say, driving the overall car park. Within our research, we have observed indeed some new opportunities, some OEMs developing their own, let's say, wallets. Mercedes, they developed their Mercedes Pay. Hyundai is coming as well with Hyundai Pay. And many others also will come here on the tier one suppliers. Harman Automotive launched their Ignite platform, platform, where you have also the possibility of doing payments. So we observe that OEMs are not giving up on this use case. They understand this is quite strategic area to invest. And again, they are doing this within the full support of their partners, including payment processors and tech companies.
It sounds as though this is a similar kind of path as we saw with automotive entertainment, in that some OEMs, partnered, some OEMs built their own, some went with device manufacturers. It's all of the various, the Apple and Google, Google and Android kinds of pieces. It sounds like we're going through this again, but that at its core gets back to the point that the two of you were making. I mean, Beatriz, you were talking about the importance of the ecosystem, and Sophia, you were talking about the importance of customer experience. It seems like you've got to have both of these in order to get the critical mass, that there has to be the ecosystem that supports it. The experience itself has to be sufficient in order to make this successful. Still early days, but I guess a ways to go yet.
Absolutely. And there's one thing I would add to that, which is that it's important to have, if you're doing anything to do with financial services, there's the regulatory piece. So unless there's an auto manufacturer that literally has its own bank and is authorized to do things around, say, the provision of payment services or the provision of credit, if they want to have something that's kind of a lending or buy now proposition. So yeah, you need to have that regulation piece. If there's an auto that did have it, then great. But if you don't, then you are going to need to partner with another partner, a financial services company or a bank who has those appropriate regulations in place.
Oh, critical point. Yes, of course, because you're not only dealing with the automotive regulatory side, but of course that banking regulatory side does have a bit of a challenge in there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. And especially when you're working across different jurisdictions, I think that can be a real headache. And, I think when you're seeing these these propositions that, they involve sort of two industries coming together, I think it's very difficult to be totally vertically integrated with something like this. I think collaboration really is key.
Well, that's the challenge. A mobile platform now suddenly you've got the potential to span regulatory jurisdictions, just on a drive, and woe betide those that have not actually understood what those ramifications are and where they go. So, what do you both think about the future directions? What should enterprises be looking for? What should we be thinking about for the market as we look for the year ahead in this transition?
I'd say one thing we haven't talked about yet is concerns about fraud. This is a massive theme for us in FinTech at the moment. Fraudsters are getting more and more sophisticated. I think we're seeing the fraud landscape moving beyond sort of predominantly document fraud, but to biometric fraud. So spoofing of voice and sort of facial recognition ID. There's a lot that can be done. And it is really bamboozling a lot of companies in the payment space. And they are having often to partner smartly with fintechs who have capabilities to detect fraud, especially biometric fraud. So I'm very interested to see how this translates into the in-car payment space. What kind of specific fraud challenges will in-car payments face? And how will automotive manufacturers and other players who are involved in that experience rise to those challenges? What appropriate safeguards are going to be put up? I think that's really interesting.
Oh, makes sense. And Beatriz, on the automotive side, what are your thoughts about what we should be keeping an eye out for?
I think that, of course, the development of infrastructures, 5G, edge and computing, power increasing in vehicle will accelerate, of course, the different use cases for in-vehicle payments. And I'd like to highlight that in-vehicle payments is just one small piece of what these big financial companies are partnering with the automotive companies, which include broader, end-to-end e-commerce platforms, payment platforms, where they can also work on what they call the online retail. It comes with banking products, notably increasing the market share, like the leasing and loans, also mobility as a service opportunity as well. So it's important to keep an eye on how financial companies will continue working with automotive, not only, of course, for the in-vehicle payment, but also for the full, let's say, vehicle life cycle process from purchase up to the sale and connected services adoption.
That's a good point. It really is that potential of the full life cycle, all of the use cases, not only of the vehicle itself, but as the drivers and passengers that they can put together. Well, it sounds like a lot to look out for. Once again, I'll point our listeners towards the research that the two of you have published around this for some background on this. Offers all sorts of useful insights to be able to dig into this in a little more detail. But I appreciate all the perspectives. It's been great having you both on the podcast. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much for having me, Eric.
Great, Eric. Thank you so much.
And that is it for this episode of Next in Tech. Thanks to our audience for staying with us. And thanks to our production team, including Carolyn Wright and Caitlin Buckley on the marketing and events teams, and our agency partner, the 199. I hope you'll join us for our next episode, where we're going to be talking about the journey to cloud native and really what enterprise orchestration really looks like and some of the challenges that many are facing in the move to what's new and what's next. I hope you'll join us then, because there is always something next in tech.